Well, Dr. Kim, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. We were just chatting about our spiritual experience stories. Ooh, we got a doozy for you guys today. So amazing. But listen, I'm going to do a little intro after we finish recording because I'll give some of the highlights, but you're board certified psychiatrist specializing in addiction and eating disorders.
Yes.
So many questions for you. But before we jump into all the things, we're going to talk about your own personal story. We're going to talk about all kinds of solutions. We're going to focus today on, co-occurring disorders. Thank you for the correct terminology about that. I'm so curious how, we treat a good method of treating that holistically. Like you were mentioning, some treatment centers just focus on the addiction, some just the eating disorders. And I know that you have plans to have an inpatient treatment center to address it in a holistic way, both at the same time. When do you see that happening?
That should be opening in end of November, beginning of December of this year.
Oh, this year.
Imminently.
That's so exciting. Imminently. Okay. That's really exciting. You're also the co-founder of Sun Cloud Health. So, you have centers in Chicago.
Yep.
Okay. I'm so excited about this. Okay. But first, the slowest lightning round you will ever participate in. I like to just front load the episode with resources. I'm obsessed with books. I know a lot of my listeners are too. So did you have, and you've been sober 18 years now, from alcohol, was it?
Yep.
Yeah. Was there a book that helped you early in recovery?
I read voraciously early in recovery.
Oh, you did?
I on weekends would literally lock myself in a room and just read.
You're a doctor. You're a smarty pants.
A couple that come to mind. There's so many, but I would say some of the most pivotal were the stories in the back of the big book. So I read a lot of 12-step literature. Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, I loved. I'm a little bit of a history nerd as well. The Spirituality of Imperfection.
Spirituality of Imperfection?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's kind of reminds me of the Brene Brown. What was that? Something about Gifts of Imperfection.
Yeah.
Have you read that one?
I have not read that one.
I think it's worth a read. It's
I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's such a compassionate look at, what we think of as imperfection. She almost puts it in a light of like, oh, you can turn it into your superpower. And we see that in people in recovery, right? People who, struggled with addiction, who overcame, are uniquely qualified to then turn around and extend their hand to pull someone else through that obstacle.
For sure. For sure.
So, but you're recommending spirituality of imperfection.
Yep.
Okay. That's a lot. That's a good reading assignment list. Was there another one?
There's more. The Waking the Tiger, which is a trauma recovery book.
Oh, ooh, the tiger being the trauma.
Yes.
Right.
And it really normalizes the physical and emotional responses to abnormal or extreme or abusive experiences, particularly early in life, how those get embedded neurologically, how people heal from those, how animals in the wild naturally heal from that.
I never even considered that.
Yeah.
Animals heal from trauma?
Yeah. The gazelle that's being chased and nearly loses its life to the tiger.
I suppose that would be traumatic.
Has a built-in trauma response that involves playing dead at first and then slowly thawing out and waking up and running off.
Wow. All right, that's a good one too. I'll have to add that one to my ever-growing list.
And then Claudia Black's It'll Never Happen to Me. That was really another very pivotal book for me.
What was it about that book that resonated with you?
Again, I think it normalized my experiences growing up in a family system that was burdened with addiction, trauma, mental illness, and how I coped with that, and what I ended up bringing to my experience of young adulthood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We do need to normalize it. There's so much stigma around just having problems in our society. I feel like it's getting better, but maybe it's because I'm in this recovery bubble. Do you feel like it's getting better? Like
I do think it's getting better. I think the pandemic really has highlighted the importance of mental health, the shortages in our system, the fragmentation in our healthcare system, where mental health historically has been sort of carved out and set over there, again, related to stigma. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We're all a bunch of weirdos over here. And being a weirdo gives you permission to do some crazy things, to be fun, shall we say. Okay, I'm going to list all of these in the show notes. I'll put links so people can find the books. These are really good recommendations. I'm gonna have to I'll have to read some of those too. Yeah. Do you have a go-to mantra or quote that you live by? Something that you find yourself saying a lot?
Probably trust God, clean house, and help others. That's one of my go-tos. And a lot
of you.
A lot of my practice today is really on being mindful and being in the moment and being with my breath and being present.
Mm-hmm. I was just about to ask you, that's a perfect segue. What is do you have a self-care routine that's either like, is it a morning practice? Do you have like a weekly schedule? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, no, it's, daily, I would say in the whole universe of self-care, it includes a prayer and meditation practice, reviewing, being connected enough to my body that I'm aware when feelings come up, and I allow time for those feelings to come up, and then time to think about those feelings, and then take action around what I need to do for myself around those feelings. And sometimes that's get up from my desk for 2 minutes and just step outside and feel the breeze. Sometimes that's making a phone call to a friend with, spiritual and emotional eyes. Sometimes it's going for a run. Sometimes it's saying no to the 5 other things that people are asking me to do, or saying no to one of those 5, Yeah. So it can be many different things, but I take care of my spiritual health, and then, physically nourish my body on, a regular basis in a flexible way that feels good and tastes good. But I would say the most annoying part of being an adult and taking care of myself is all of the preventative care stuff that comes along with, approaching age 50, like yearly physicals, blood work.
Oh my gosh.
Colonoscopy, mammograms, dental care. I mean, it's a lot. Like, that in and of itself feels like
it's a whole thing. I hear it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
I was just like, check, I need to do that. That's on the to-do list. Yep.
Yeah.
All the things.
Yeah. But all the other stuff is it's just like part of it's like muscle memory. at this point. It's just part of my routine and part of my flow.
I feel like in the beginning, like starting a self-care practice, if you don't have one, feels like a lot. And
Oh, for sure.
I love the, sort of awareness that it becomes integrated, that it doesn't become, it's not like this effort thing. It's almost like you just do it naturally. It doesn't
Yep.
require, and it can be, have you ever had this experience where you're like, oh, I could be meditating, prayer journal, and there's this daily reader, and then there's a stretching thing, and then and like it could take over your whole day if you let it. But I had a friend refer to it as the self-care smorgasbord, Terry. She's going to be like, hey, you mentioned me again. But I love
Yeah.
that idea, because now I'm like, pick three things, and that's enough. Like, we don't have
Yeah.
to turn our self-care practice into a to-do list that we beat ourselves up about, like if we don't do
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Which
I
is
think the
easy.
whole point of self-care is like the attitude with which we approach it. It shouldn't be
Yes.
one of like, I have to do this so I could check off the box and get another thing done and be a good, person in
It's-
recovery, or be the healthiest. It's like, it's about balance and like a practical, livable
Yeah.
recovery.
No, I like that. It's so easy to forget that, oh yeah, this is supposed to be nourishing, not depleting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
We are so funny, all or nothing. Now listen, we were talking about I've been asking people about their spiritual experience stories, because those are the stories, I think, that, like, when we speak from the heart, that's what connects.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in the beginning, when people are first getting sober, or even if you've been sober for a while, like we've been sober for a while, it's easy to revert back to sort of a rote, like it's all on me. I got to do everything. It's my to-do list gets too big. And then I start thinking I have to do everything. But these spiritual experience stories remind me that I am connected, that we're all connected. But until you have the experience yourself, it really doesn't mean much. And so I love hearing people's spiritual experience stories. And you had a good one that you were going to share.
Yeah. Well, I believe that, our spiritual health is a vital part of health. And, unfortunately, ASAM took spiritual manifestations out of its definition of addiction.
What's
I think
ASAM?
that's the American Society for Addiction Medicine.
Oh, okay. They took it
Yeah.
out?
They took it out. It was their 2011 definition of
Oh, for fuck's
addiction.
sake.
It was perfect, and their updated one that I think came out in 2019, I want to say, um, really focuses on the brain disease. And, for sure it is a brain disease, and it's also a spiritual malady, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
growing up in a violent house,
Mhm.
I would pray and I actually felt comfort, and felt protected.
Mhm.
And those were some of my earliest spiritual experiences. We went to church, and singing was also part of like something
Mhm.
that helped me feel just connected and safe. So spirituality for me is all about feeling safe in in a world that is sometimes dangerous, or oftentimes dangerous, and feeling connected, like knowing that I'm part of something much bigger than myself.
Mhm.
Um, and I lost that, after a variety of traumas and my own, addiction, a terrible eating disorder and food addiction. And, really came back to that in my own recovery journey. And first it was really just being part of a group of people who had recovered and who, shockingly to me, seemed to really care about me. you know, Thought that was very odd and weird and a little creepy of them. But
Some of them are creepy. God bless them. Bless
but
their hearts.
like being part of, like I played sports growing up, so I knew what it meant to be part of a team and to function
Mhm.
as a team, and the importance of like being connected as a team. And the isolation that these diseases bring, I think is and that trauma brings is I think adds the most burden to people who've experienced any of it. And so recently, and my spirituality has waxed and waned and grown and, taken all sorts of turns in my recovery. But recently my mom passed away 2 years ago from a rare type of breast cancer that was super aggressive that older people usually don't get, but she got it. Um, and I flew down there. This was during the pandemic, so I flew down there to help her get settled in from the hospital to home hospice. I thought that's what we were going to do, but by the time I got down there, she had already deteriorated so much that they recommended just keeping her at a hospice by the hospital.
Oh, wow.
And she wasn't really talking much at that point. I could tell that she knew it was me, when I got there. Like, her last words to me were like, "Oh, Kimmy." She called me Kimmy. And I stayed with her by her bedside. My siblings, came and went. Her husband, my stepfather, they all went home at night, and I just stayed. And the night she passed away, I was like, I really don't want to be here. Like, in my heart, I was like, I really don't want to be here alone when this happens. I wanted to be with her for sure. Like, I definitely didn't want to leave. But that night around like 12:30, my stepfather came back to the hospice after leaving at 8 p.m. And I thought the nurses had called him to tell him, like, it's probably going to be her last hour or two. But he said he was sleeping and he felt somebody grab his leg and shake him. And when he woke up, like, nobody was around. My brother was staying at the house with him. And he said, he was like so sure it was somebody like shaking him. And he just felt like prompted to come to the hospice. And so he came and we prayed together, and and my mom passed away within like 30 minutes of him getting there.
Wow.
And my twin, I have a boy twin, brother twin, was staying at her house too, and said something very similar. Like, he was sleeping and he felt something like shake his shoulder, and he looked up and like nobody was there, and he was really freaked out, but it was the same time. And
Wow.
I'm not one to believe like, oh, like, if I was listening to myself tell you this story, I'd be like, okay, she's one of those crazy people that believes in like ghosts and spirits.
Weirdo.
Right, exactly. But when I experienced that, I mean, I just had like chills, when my stepfather was like, no, like, a nurse didn't call me, like, something woke me up, like somebody woke me up, but I don't know who it was.
Now we
Like,
do.
oh, my
It
mother
was
was
your
taking
mom.
care of me to the very last minute, like, she didn't want her
Oh,
girl to
so
be there
sweet.
alone.
So you guys were together with her when your mom passed?
Yeah,
The two of you together?
yeah. It was really beautiful, really painful, obviously, but
Yeah.
um definitely one of the most profound moments of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I was with my mom when she passed. It was probably the singular most precious moment of my life,
Yeah,
honestly. Yeah.
yeah. And
So proud.
we had a love-hate relationship when I was sick. I blamed
Yeah.
all of my traumas on her.
All her fault. Yeah.
Moms always get the blame, and
Damn
she
it.
was an abused wife and had been
Mm,
abused as a kid.
hmm.
But I got to see all of that when I made amends to her. And
Wow.
just the last 10 years of our relationship was all I saw was all the love that she had for me. And I think
Mm,
that's another part of spirituality and spiritual healing is being
hmm.
opened up to the love that's around you in this
Hmm.
universe and the people that love you, even if they're, sick in some ways themselves, being able
Right.
to take in the love, but
Mhm.
keep out the sick, if
Right.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Separating the person from the behavior.
Yeah. And taking
Yeah.
in the good that they have. Like, I think, being able to not throw the baby out with the bathwater is a really wise thing, a mature thing to be able
Yeah. It is a mature
to
thing to
do.
do. It's not always easy.
Right.
We get super triggered and, our nervous system gets hijacked. It's hard to stay grounded in
Hmm.
those really old, established relationships. It's tough.
Yeah.
That's so crazy because I was like, oh, let's talk about a spiritual experience story. And, I gave you the example of when the day after my mom passed, there was this brilliant sunrise. I knew in my heart she was on the other side. And you were like, whoa, I was going to share a story about my mom. I was like,
Yeah.
that felt like a
And
spiritual
just that,
experience.
whenever I see, I think I shared with you, whenever I see like hues of red or pink in the
Mm-hmm.
sunset or rainbows,
Yeah.
I know she's like in that,
Yeah.
I can feel it.
We had an experience. We went to Italy for the first time and we arrive and it's a kind of you take an overnight flight. I can't sleep on planes like that, but I was all disoriented in the morning and we land and I'm like, oh my God, here we are. We just so happened to run into this one restaurant that I was like, we have got to, whatever happens, we got to go to this restaurant. So we like stumbled right into it. And I was like, oh my gosh, here we are. We were waiting in line and a bicycle pulls up and stops right in front of me. My mother's name is Aida. And the bicycle had a sticker on it. It said Aida. I was
Oh,
like,
wow.
it's not that common of a name, right?
Yeah.
And there it was right in front of me. I was like, hi, Mom. And then as we left, we were going through this line at the airport and this gal was filling out this form online and there was like on a computer screen and I'm short, I can't see anything. My husband's tall and he goes, do you see the name on the screen? I'm like, I can't see anything. And he's like, her name's Zaida. I was like, what is that? So just as we got there and then just as we were leaving, it was like she
Yeah.
was with us the whole time. It was
Yeah.
so cool. And those are like those, it's like those spiritual experiences where like something happens where it touches your heart and it's hard to explain. Like, and maybe it's because like I'm assigning meaning to it, but it felt so personal.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what spiritual experiences are. You mentioned words like feeling safe and connected. Like that's exactly how I felt
Yeah.
during those
And
moments. Personal,
personally connected, I
personally.
think
Yeah.
that's an important part of it because it was easy for me to say like, yes, I believe in forces, powerful forces in the universe, like
Yeah.
gravity and, all
Yeah.
sorts of physics,
Right.
physical laws
You're a science
apply
girl.
to
I love me some
everybody.
science. Yeah.
Um, but, and again, I think growing up in an environment that was wrought with addiction
Mm,
and, um, struggles with like poverty and struggles with
mm,
abuse, like it's easy to carry that experience forward in your lens towards
mhm.
all help in the universe, right? Like,
Right.
well, I was kind of irrelevant as a kid in an addictive family system, because if
Right.
you're wrapped up in addiction, you're not emotionally and spiritually attending in a consistent way to the needs of your children, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Well, that is actually also a good segue because I kind of like to take a step back and then talk about sort of like where this all started for you. So you mentioned you had a twin brother. Did you have other siblings?
yeah, I had 4 older siblings.
Four older siblings, and then the two of you? Were you guys the
Yeah,
babies?
we were unexpected
She's
twins.
mom's like, no more. So
My
okay,
mom didn't know that there were 2 of us until she gave birth to me, and she said, "There's
oh,
another kid in there," to the male OBGYN who said, "No, no, honey, that's just the afterbirth." And she said, "I've had kids before. There's another kid in there."
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Why are men like that? Anyway,
they've
that's
never had a kid before.
yeah. Oh no, honey. That is so funny. I'm not going to even go down that rabbit hole. Let's just say that women need to trust their instincts, and we know our bodies, and we need to advocate for ourselves. So God bless your mom. She said there's another one, and along came your brother.
Yes.
What a surprise that must have been. Okay, so there's lots of kids in the house. So you mentioned your mom had suffered a lot of abuse. It sounded like in the marriage that your father had an issue with alcoholism. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. My dad
Okay.
had pretty severe addiction. He died when he was 46
Oh,
after like 4 like cardiac bypass surgeries.
were
Smoked every
the
day, drank every
uh
day.
okay. What did he do professionally?
He so he didn't graduate from high school, but learned how to weld. So he was
Mm.
a welder until he went on disability. So for as long as I think probably when I was 3 or 4, he went on disability.
Oh, so all your working memories of him were of him being on disability.
Yeah.
And you mentioned poverty. So was your mom the breadwinner after that?
She stayed at home and took care of her 6 kids and sick husband.
Wow.
Yeah. So we were on we were just on Social Security and food stamps.
Mhm.
Got a lot of
That's really hard.
hand-me-downs from.
Yeah.
It didn't feel hard at the time. It got a little bit harder when you get to that age where other kids have stuff and you're like, how come I
Yeah.
have, cousin Christine's clothes from 2 years ago and other kids are wearing these like Vidal Sassoon jeans.
Dittos. Did you ever have dittos? Oh my
No,
God, that's
but I know what
embarrassing.
they are.
Yeah, I'm a little older than you.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot. I don't know. Yeah, so
Like we made our own milk from the powder. You put the
uh
powder in the jug, you add water, shake it up,
yeah.
that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that sucks. I remember we, we we weren't rich either when we were growing up, so I'm familiar.
Yeah. So my
Okay.
dad was a welder and um, you know, really smart guy.
Hmm.
Um, really loved me. I knew he loved me.
Hmm.
Like he and I had a really special relationship, despite all of the sickness
Hmm.
and illness. And my mom graduated from high school, but was um, encouraged by her family to not go to college and to just get a job and find a husband.
Hmm.
That's what she did.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what they did back then. So it sounds like so your parents were both around all the time and you had the 6 kids. Did your father, was he a present drinker, or was he the kind of guy that left the house and then came home like upset?
he was mostly there, you
Okay.
know, but not there, right? Like after you've
Right.
had 12 old style lights, you're not,
Yeah,
you're not
that's
really there
not
anymore.
really there. Yeah, that's got to be hard.
So there, but
Okay.
not there.
Yeah, and I think it's so hard when you have someone that you love. Like for little girls, the dad, is such a pivotal role because that's how we learn to interact with men. And I know a lot of us end up repeating that dynamic of that feeling. We recreate our family of origin in our adult life, so I've seen so many women, pick men that are similar to their husbands and in feeling, if nothing else. Was that your experience?
I, I feel like I got so sick that all I did was, I hit bottom in med school, residency. I
Ooh,
was
that's a rough time to hit
stuttering
bottom.
bottom, but that's all I did was like school or residency. And yeah, so my like social life was very, very sort of constricted and limited.
Was it your social life is basically with the other students or residents?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in college, I played basketball. So I actually have like friends from college who are like
Oh,
good, loving, amazing women, none of whom knew that I was like really struggling with anything
they didn't
in
know?
in college. I mean, in college, when you go
Oh,
to
yeah.
college and you're on the basketball team, I went to University of Chicago, so we were like, you know, I didn't realize this, but like all of the nerdy academic kids were like, she's an athlete, she's a cool kid, you know. And
Yeah.
I was like, they think I'm a cool kid? Wow, that's weird. But like if there wasn't a game, the next day or we were out of
Mm.
season, we drank hard, really hard.
In case it wasn't clear, very yeah, I get that. Yeah, it's sort of hard, when you're amongst you're in that certain age group where everyone's kind of partying, your behavior doesn't seem abnormal by contrast, right?
Right.
We're just doing what everybody else is doing. But sometimes it's once everyone else starts to sort of move on with their lives and they start transitioning to careers and
Exactly.
things like that, and you're still doing the same crazy ass shit you did on the weekends in
Right.
college.
Yeah. So that like divergence started happening in medical school.
In medical
But
school.
even in
Okay.
medical school, like anesthesiologists and ER doctors also have high rates of alcoholism. So like
Yes, man.
a
That's
lot of the
terrifying.
people that I hung out with in med school are anesthesiologists now and ER doctors.
Right. All your friends.
Right.
Let's
All
just all
friends.
assume that they're all healthy now.
But I avoided like I kind of like never like I kind of avoided relationships, So
Okay.
I didn't get married until I was 38, I want to say.
Okay.
Um and I was sober for a good like 4 years before I really even started dating.
Okay, you're already sober.
Yeah.
Wow, good for you. 4 years?
Hmm.
I went 5 months. But we're still together 28 years later, so far so good.
Amazing.
I know it's
Amazing.
it's an outlier
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. And
Actually
I
that's
met
really
my husband through recovery circles,
Oh, did
like
you?
he was a
He's
good
sober too?
friend. His kid, he never really, I mean, I think I keep telling him, like, you drank alcoholically in college. It's like,
Yeah.
it made me feel sick. I was like, okay. But he doesn't drink at all. He has
Okay.
his own stuff and his own
Yeah.
trauma history and his own recovery
Well,
journey in the
we won't have to
eating
talk about
disorder
him.
world.
Oh, he did.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
so you guys had a lot to
Our
talk
meeting
about.
was like we met over a buffet table
Oh,
at a going away party for my best friend in
oh.
recovery, and I was like, why are you having my friend Jack make you a plate to like you're gonna
Mm.
take that plate to go, and like what, you don't eat in front of like, because I, as an eating disorder
You cued
psychiatrist,
it.
like
Did you cue into that immediately?
immediately I was like, oh,
Yeah.
what do we have here? I was like, so you don't eat in front of other people? And he's like, actually, like I
Hmm.
was hospitalized for anorexia
Hmm.
as a teen. I was like, oh my god, that's so cool, like I'm in recovery from bulimia. And
Only people in recovery would think that that's cool.
he
We are
was like, yeah, bulimia, like people with anorexia don't like that.
oh.
You
He's
guys
all
are out of
shaming.
control.
Yeah, you guys,
We prefer
shame.
control.
Yeah, shame on you.
So that
That's
was
so
our meeting.
wow.
And
Love at first sight.
love at first sight. It really was. Our first
That's
date, we ate at a place called Feast.
you
And
ate.
of course,
Okay.
I'd been recovered from my eating disorder for I think like 5, 6 years at that point.
I
And
shouldn't joke about that. That shit's not funny. But
yeah.
that's
Well,
okay.
no, I mean, I think, this is one of the things that I think a lot of women in recovery struggle with, like, oh God, like
Oh my God. Huge.
how am I gonna
Yeah.
date and like eat and date and like, oh God,
Yeah.
But I asked him on our first date, like, so what medications do you take? And he was like, none of your effing business. And I was
Dr.
like,
Kim.
okay. Just curious.
Yeah,
Doesn't everybody
boundaries.
ask that on their first date?
Just just testing the boundaries a little bit. Just want to know where we're
Little,
at.
little medication history review, first date material.
Well,
I
that's a
thought
normal
so.
question. That was a normal question for you, huh? That is so
Tell me
funny.
what psychotropic medications you've ever taken in your life, and then we could go on with this relationship or not.
Or not. Yeah. That's a good sorting process.
Yeah.
Who needs a sorting hat when you can be a doctor and sort medications? That's awesome. All right. I want to take you back just a little bit. Okay, so family history. There's a lot of, you mentioned
There was a lot
violence,
of physical abuse, mainly like my dad and
abusing
my
your
mom
mom.
fighting, and my
Yeah.
dad with my older brothers.
Ooh, were your older brothers trying to protect your mom?
Um,
Or were
you
they
know,
just mad at him? They would just fought.
no, like, I mean, my dad was just really sick, and the rules would always change, and
Uh,
um, it's just it was a violent household, so
uh,
I learned like cope I learned how to like stay in the eye of the hurricane for safety,
yeah.
and like be on my dad's good side, and also, I got this, maybe came into the world with the gift of sort of like hypervigilance, and was also then,
Mhm.
coping with hypervigilance to
Mhm.
scan the room, predict what's going to happen, and do what you need to do to like stay out of firing line.
Yeah, I hear that hypervigilance lends to, how I think sometimes we hear women being shamed about being too much or overly sensitive. And
Too sensitive.
did you get
You're,
that?
uh, I got, you're too sensitive, and you're so serious. And I was like,
Serious.
somebody around here better be, because like the shit is going down and nobody seems to be paying attention, you
Yes.
know?
So did that lead into like hyper responsibility?
Yeah, for sure. And I think
Yeah.
many people in helping professions and many doctors have that,
Mm, I
you
am
know.
familiar. Yes.
Yes,
So okay, so that's a lot. So would you consider that complex PTSD, CPTSD?
I would. And it took me a long time to sort of, you know, um, not even agree with that, but like understand that, for
Yeah.
me. Um,
Yeah.
because when I was doing my trauma recovery work with the therapist that I say saved my life, he
Mm.
from the very beginning was like, "You've been severely traumatized." And I'm like, "Stop exaggerating." Like, "You're
Yeah.
exaggerating. I'm fine. It
I'm
wasn't that
fine.
bad." I hear
Just
stories from people all the time that are way, way worse, and that's true. But
yeah,
we know that that's one of the ways to stay in denial
is to
around.
compare.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
like minimize your own feelings, like, oh, these other I've heard that too. Man, I had this gal in my life who suffered chronic child abuse, sexual
yeah,
abuse.
yeah,
And her coping mechanism was when we talked about God, she said, well, I knew that there were other kids who needed him more. And I was like, wow,
yeah,
that's that comparison thing. Like there's other kids that are worse off than me.
yeah,
That's a pretty typical response.
yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure.
Um, let's talk a little. I like to get the pivotal story about like when you were inactive, alcohol use disorder. Um, what happened that you decided that you needed to get help?
So there were like two sort of pivotal, I guess, watershed moments. One was New Year's Day of 2000 at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I must have been in med school. So I had decided after my third year of med school to take a year off to do research. And I did actually like do research in a lab and published from my time in that lab. But
Oh, that's a big deal.
I needed to like
Publishing a paper.
step out of like the clinic, like the hospital clinical, basically being around other people all the time. Piece of it.
It was too people-y.
And I was, binging and purging almost every day. And, when I wasn't eating very much, and I was drinking a lot. And New Year's Day, I was with my family, like one of my older brothers and my twin and my mom, and was completely wasted and was like just a little out of control, like threatening to like beat up my older brother. I was like pretty emaciated at this point, and my older brother is a big guy and played football, and I thought I was going to be able to beat him up, and he was just like basically, like, have you ever seen when like when we were kids, they would sort of hold our heads,
Right, you're
like
swinging. Yeah.
It was sort of like that, but an adult version of it. And he was like kind of laughing at me, but my mom was like threatening to call the police, and I don't
Wow.
really even remember it very well, but the next morning they were like, you need to get help, like, and inside I was like, oh, thank God, like I really do.
Oh,
But outside I was like, you guys need help, like,
yeah.
like, what are you talking? I was very defensive, but I ended up going to see a therapist that someone my sister had seen, um, to work through her, her healing from trauma. Like,
Mhm.
there was sexual abuse in our family system as
Oh, there
well.
was.
Yeah. So I went to see him, and he just had, when you meet someone who is just so grounded and free of fear and connected to his body and so comfortable in his skin and in the world. And I knew he had been through some stuff, and he had
Mhm.
been sober like 20 years, or a ridiculous, sounded like a ridiculous amount of years in my
Yeah.
head. So I started seeing him, and it was probably 3 months into seeing him that I started sharing with him about what I was doing with food, because I was extremely ashamed that I was binging and
Mhm.
purging, and how I was drinking. Like I would drink on the train out to his his
His
office for
office.
my sessions. Then my mom would pick me up, and we would go to a bar afterwards and have another drink.
Your mom drank with you?
Of course,
Oh,
like, like I come from a family like steeped in alcoholism and also a lot of denial,
that's
but
so, well, it's so funny is I just assumed that your dad was a drinker and your mom like didn't drink so that she could,
um,
no, that wasn't,
she
wasn't
didn't
trying to stay in
drink
control.
as much as he did,
Oh,
and I
okay.
think this is another common thing when you have like a severe alcoholic in the family,
Yeah.
like my dad was. It's very easy to have an alcohol use disorder but not really know it, because I wasn't on disability. I wasn't sitting on the couch smoking Pall Malls, drinking 24 cans of old style light every day. So how could I have a problem with alcohol?
In comparison, it does,
Yeah,
it is quite different. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and this is part of where I think, I know we talked about like when we talked, the DSM sort of failing
Yeah.
psychiatry and addiction in some
Yeah.
ways. This is kind of part of that.
Why did the DSM fail? Because the counselor that you were seeing was using that as a guide and
No, no, no,
doing it.
no. Thank God he wasn't, but he was using like the understanding of like the biology behind addiction, the spiritual
Ah,
components, the emotional
uh-huh.
components.
Yeah.
Basically, he was using the framework of the earlier ASAM definition of addiction.
Got it.
But
Ah,
I think the DSM-5 fails many people in modern day psychiatry who don't fit into, it's a categorical tool,
Mm-hmm.
And so many of the co-occurring illnesses and syndromes that I see are transdiagnostic.
What does
You
that
know,
mean? They
it
cross
means
multiple
that
categories?
there are core symptoms that cross over multiple diagnostic categories
Okay.
that aren't related to this man-made category
Yeah.
as much as they are related to underlying neurobiology that produces
Ah,
the symptoms. And if
okay.
we keep
Yeah.
an eye towards, part of like why we created SunCloud Health was to create a trans diagnostic treatment model where we
Mm,
treat people from a
right.
humanistic model that looks
Yeah.
at underlying neurobiology, and
Right.
that can take somebody who has major depressive disorder and an alcohol addiction and bulimia and also food addiction on top of that, or bulimia
Right.
without food addiction. So there are many different like disease packages
Wow.
that a person could come into the world with or come to treatment with.
Okay.
And instead of just focusing on one facet of a person,
Mm-hmm.
we really try to focus on all of the symptoms, how they're related, what's the underlying neurobiology, and sustainable recovery for the whole person, not just for their alcohol use or not just for their depression.
Yeah, I have conversations with people that always end up at the place. Dr. Gabor Mate is sort of famous
Yeah,
for saying, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain.
yeah,
Right. So every conversation I have with somebody who's in the sort of healing role includes the trauma, the underlying, but we do need to deal with the symptoms. Right. So
yeah,
the alcohol is a symptom, the eating
yeah,
disorders, whether it's overeating or undereating or however however you define that.
yeah.
um it is important I always, there's so many different kinds of 12-step programs because people find value in communicating in the language of that specific symptom.
Right. Well, and in connecting with a community that's focused on and that can help with, that has
Yeah.
expertise recovering from that symptom set, you
Yeah.
know.
And I think it's so important, like, you're 12-step oriented, is that right?
Mhm.
After you went to the counselor, did he send you to 12-step?
He recommended mutual support groups,
Oh, okay.
you know,
And
too.
so you did the eating one and the alcohol one? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you went through the whole steps and got the sponsor and did the whole thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an
It's a
amazing process.
it is.
Yeah.
It's a
Um,
it's a design for living that keeps on
yeah,
growing, and
yeah,
it sort of has a life of its own now.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's important to find good meetings, but this idea of inpatient treatment, we were discussing earlier. I have a friend who, and I've heard this many times, people come to me to, for a variety of reasons, but the people who have like bariatric surgery or people who have, body dysmorphia in some way, they are encouraged to attend a 12-step meeting or at least do some self-examination around their alcohol use because of the switching addictions kind of a thing. Do you see that in the work that you do?
Yeah, well, the research literature substantiates, increased risk for developing alcohol use disorder for people post bariatric surgery.
Hmm.
At least some of that appears to be physiologic. When you alter the way that substances are absorbed by
Hmm.
doing bariatric surgery, what ends up happening is you get, if you take, a non-bariatric person that has a beer and
Hmm.
drinks it in 30 minutes, and a person with bariatric surgery who has a beer and drinks it in 30 minutes, the person with bariatric surgery is going to get a much steeper rush of alcohol
Mm.
than the person who has a normal GI tract. It's going to be a much slower, more mellow sort of onset and offset. And
Okay.
we know that one of the things that can trigger addiction circuitry
Hmm.
is drugs or substances that have quick onsets and rapid absorption through the blood-brain barrier. that leads to dopamine spikes in the reward center,
Right.
becomes very reinforcing. And then, the addiction circuitry becomes like a well-oiled machine.
Right. It's a circuitry, not just only in your brain, but your gut. And
Yeah.
I interviewed Dr. Anna Lemke, who wrote
Oh,
Dopamine
yeah.
Nation. Yeah. And she had this metaphor of the seesaw, right? Like, your brain is seeking homeostasis. And if you get too high, then the brain will compensate with an equal opposite low. Right. And then it does speak to what you're talking about, the circuitry, and it becomes sort of this ingrained thing that is difficult to break.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, for a lot of people, I didn't know about rehab when I got sober. I just went to a lot of meetings.
Yes.
Yeah, but I didn't have co-occurring disorders. And so can you sort of talk about what it would look like to treat people that have, both alcohol use disorder and eating disorders? How do you treat them?
Yeah. So again, we focus on, I like to describe it to people as, if you go to college, right? If you go to university, many times there are core classes that everybody needs to take, and then selective classes or, concentration specific classes.
Mm,
And that's kind of how our treatment model works. So there are core groups that happen every day for everybody. That would be like, for example, trauma focused process groups,
mm,
the things that pull together all of the transdiagnostic dimensions
mm,
and work to support people in connecting and then healing from those things. And then also disease specific groups, that focus on alcohol use disorder, or that focus on, body image or nutrition or eating disorders. And food addiction, is, uh, can be a part of eating disorders. It can be separate from eating disorders, but some people have
I'm
both.
kind of, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you define, like, or maybe just call out like what some of them are? Cause I'm a little fuzzy. Like, I know that there's like food addiction where people like overeat, but then there's the binge and purge that's overeating
Yeah.
and
Yeah. So classic eating disorders would be anorexia nervosa, which is, restricting your eating,
restricting.
fear of gaining weight, um, obsession with body image distortion, a lot of rigidity, a lot of fear foods, so people won't eat many categories of foods like carbohydrates or fats or sugars, right? Some people with anorexia have binge purge subtype where
Oh,
they
they do.
intermittently binge and purge as well.
What about
But
the
they're malnourished
exercise?
and underweight.
Is there like over exercise? Is that a part of
Yeah.
the
So
anorexia?
bulimia, yeah, many people with anorexia are compulsive exercisers as well.
Okay.
And then with bulimia, it's typically people who are average weight or higher weight, who binge eat and then purge in some way, shape, or form. Most people, when they purge by vomiting, but there are other ways as well, like overexercise, for example.
Oh, over exercise is a purge.
Yep. Or using substances like
Laxative.
methamphetamines
Oh,
or laxatives or synthroid.
okay.
And then there's binge eating disorder, which is out of control binge eating episodes that are
Okay.
not associated with compensatory behaviors.
So I've heard this idea that it doesn't matter what the problem is, the solution is the same. It's spiritual. Oh gosh, I'm going to forget what it is, but it's like, it's spiritual, it's something else, and it has nothing to do with the problem. Um, is that sort of what, like, so we have all these things. Do the solutions all come back to healing, doing the trauma work, finding a spiritual connection,
Um,
and community?
that's part of it,
Okay.
So there are, I think if you have an eye towards the underlying neurobiology, There are
Mhm.
going to be specific treatments for specific people because there's, different people have different genes, different people have different
Mm.
neurocircuitry going
Mhm.
on. There's a tremendous amount of biodiversity. This is relevant in the eating disorder world because most eating disorder professionals don't believe in food addiction. So when I say
Really?
food addiction, I mean people who have physical responses and addiction neurocircuitry lit up when they ingest certain food substances. Typically, we see it with, ultra processed foods that are high in refined sugars or high in white
Mm.
flour. Um, and there's a subset of patients with eating disorders that have that.
Okay.
Um, but most places in the eating disorder world would say that's not even a valid thing. You just need to try everything in moderation and get rid of your diet culture and diet mentality. But recovery from food addiction is not about being on a diet or a diet culture or losing weight. It's really about normalizing the relationship with food and body and eating
Mhm.
in a way that isn't constantly igniting your reward circuitry.
Okay.
And it's important to like tease out restrictive eating disorders from food addiction because when
Right.
you restrict your food intake, food becomes even more rewarding.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that's more like pseudo addiction. It's not really food addiction. It just looks like it might be because the person is malnourished.
Right. Right.
So
So complicated.
yes, it becomes very complicated. And I think anybody who says like this is the treatment for this huge swath of the population that has this huge DSM category diagnosis is missing a whole lot of nuance and is not
Mm.
taking an individualized, sophisticated approach that looks at
Yeah.
transdiagnostic symptoms and underlying biology for that specific individual, you
Mhm.
know. Like spirituality, it needs to be
Yeah.
personalized,
It
you know.
does. It does. Everyone's coming with a whole bag of different things.
Yeah.
Listen, this is super fascinating. I could see that I could talk to you forever. We might have to do a round 2. Would you be open around 2?
Totally.
No
Totally.
pressure. Not to put you on the hot seat. I just feel like there's so much to talk about here. I know we have a hard stop. I want to make sure that you get to your next call. Um, so I'm sure there's going to be lots of people who want to reach out to you to talk about some of these resources that you offer. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you to start learning about how SunCloud might help?
Yeah, so our website is www.suncloudhealth.com. My husband and I co-founded and started the place. So I
Awesome.
always say like you could just call my husband's cell phone and I'll give that out to you, but he's asked me not to do that. And then my email address is drkim at suncloudhealth.com. And we have, like currently we have one residential unit for adults and then 3 adult intensive outpatient and day treatment programs and 3 adolescent intensive outpatient and day treatment programs.
Yeah, I actually should have highlighted that early on that because the adolescent is so important. And I think resources are so desperately needed. I'll probably call it out when I do the overview before I publish this episode.
Yeah,
So I will, because that is super important. Resources are not always easy to find for the
especially for
adolescent.
adolescents and
So
I mean,
hard.
like huge demand since the
Yeah.
pandemic for
Huge
adolescents.
demand. And then as a parent, we learned some things going through the process ourselves about, like we sent our son out of state because we were told not to send them locally because then they would just get connected with other kids that are still, really sick, frankly.
Right.
So they said send them far away. And I was like, wow, that was probably the best advice we got during the whole crazy ass process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it
It's a lot.
depends, it
Depends. Yeah, depends.
depends on who the kids are and who
Yeah.
the staff are that are managing the kids, right? And what
Isn't
sort
that isn't
of
that isn't that true about so many things about this space? Is that it just depends. People come with their issues, and it's all so, everyone is so different. It just depends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm so happy to have you as a resource, somebody who is so, I think personal experience is so important, and
Yeah.
having all of the science behind you, and the training, and it's just so important to have sort of a holistic approach and personal experience that speaks volumes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming today. It
You're
was
welcome.
such a pleasure. I can't wait for round two. I'm gonna have all new questions for you.
Great. Awesome. It's been great spending the time with you.
Yeah, I'll reach out soon, but thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll leave all the links in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you
Have a
so
great
much.
day.
Bye, Arlena.
Bye.